Hey guys, today is Thursday, April 10th. Although I'm not really telling the truth, I'm doing this video right after my show I did with Z-Man. We talked about economics and we really got on the subject of China because China's the issue right now. China's the issue. And I'm not going to use a green screen today. So you don't see the pretty background of my backyard because I wanted to show you a card. And can you see this card? It's called the China card. The China card. And it comes from a game called The Twilight Struggle. One of the best two-player strategy games I've ever played. It's excellent. If you're a board gamer, check it out. I wish I had more people that love these type of board games. It's about the Cold War. And the China card was a real term in the 70s, in the 60s and 70s. And the idea was you had the United States and you had the Soviet Union in a Cold War, right? But then you had China, and China, they were communist, yeah, but they kind of went a different way. They went into Maoism. They kind of, like the Chinese and Asians often do, like North Korea, the dear leader. They took communism, but turned it into this weird cult of personality. And that's what happened in China with Mao. And you had a little bit of that in the Soviet Union with Stalin, but still it was more about Marxism, whereas Chinese communism was different. So China and Russia, or the Soviet Union, even though they're both communist and they both hated America, they had frictions between themselves. And in fact, at one point they had a border dispute and they actually got in a skirmish. So the tensions could be high between the Soviet Union and China. And the United States, we realized that. And we said, well, hey, what we could do is play the China card. That's what they called it. We could cozy up to China to piss off the Soviet Union because we don't want the Soviet Union and China to get together. That would be a disaster. And so that's where that expression came from. And again, the first president really to go to China after it was under communism was Nixon. And Nixon was cozying up to China. And what was happening during that time, we had just gone through the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War was still raging when he went to China, but it was winding down. We knew it was pretty much a lost cause. And Nixon was trying to find a settlement called Peace with Honor. We want peace with honor. Sound familiar, right? Involved in a expensive war, and we won out of it. That's the situation now in Ukraine. Now we don't have troops in Ukraine like we did in Vietnam. We had like 500,000 troops there, but we are spending a lot of money, a lot of weapons going to Ukraine, and our armed forces, or at least our generals, have been more active in the war than a lot of people realize. There was a New York Times article that said pretty much all the planning for the war and all the battles, they were conducted by U.S. generals. Ukraine, they were kind of the pawns, but we were all behind it under the Biden regime. And that war, just like Vietnam, is going to be lost. And so we're trying to find a face-saving way out of it. And we kind of have a switch here because what's happening now with Trump wants to cozy up with Russia because he's worried about China, whereas Nixon was trying to cozy up with China because he was worried about the Soviet Union. It's kind of funny how that flipped, but it's a very similar scenario. And the times were very similar. During Nixon's time, there was a lot of deficit spending had started. We had the Vietnam war, and war is always expensive. And then we had the space race to try to get to the moon, which we did. Yeah, we did go to the moon, but that was expensive, the Apollo program. And then at the time in the Cold War, we were in a nuclear weapon race, and that's very expensive. So there's a lot of expensive things that were happening in the economy. Then that led to a financial crisis with other countries, specifically France. They were trying to make a run on our gold because after World War II, the reserve currency was the dollar. It was no longer the British pound sterling. It was the dollar because we were the biggest nation, and we backed the dollar with gold. So we had all this gold in Fort Knox. And so if you took a dollar, technically you could exchange it for the equivalent in gold. That's what backed the dollar. Well, France, they were trying to do a run on the gold, and Nixon saw how that would could destabilize our country. So something had to be done. And by the way, just as an aside, there was an American movie, James Bond movie, Goldfinger. And in the novel, the basic plot, at least in the novel, was some evil mastermind was trying to put a nuclear bomb in Fort Knox to destroy all the gold, to collapse the world economy. So it was a big to-do. Just as an aside, that's how that movie came about. Now no one would care. I don't even know if we have any gold in Fort Knox, but at one time we did. So there's a dramatic thing. So Nixon had to make a big change where we went off the gold standard. We went on the petrodollar, meaning we had Saudi Arabia and OPEC agree to that. Hey, if they sell their oil, they're just selling it in dollars. In exchange, we will protect Saudi Arabia. And because of that, everyone needs oil, right? So we were able to continue deficit spending after Nixon, really until now. This is how we're able to spend more than we take in, and there's not hyperinflation because of the rest of the world. But now we're in a similar crisis because countries are starting to break away. Like we put all these sanctions on Russia because we thought Russia, when we put these sanctions on them and deplatform them, there'd be a revolution, Putin would be overthrown, and we would have gay pride parades now in Moscow. Well, that didn't happen. Russia, they were able to build their economy internally. They have their own factories, they have their own farmland. And more importantly, they started to trade with other countries like China and Brazil and India. And they became separate from our financial system with SWIFT because we kicked them off. It wasn't their fault. And all of a sudden, we're starting like, oh, wait a minute. You're supposed to collapse because we need the dollar to be king. Otherwise, our whole economic system will fail. So this is a situation that Donald Trump came in when he came in the White House. And he brought up a lot about BRICS, and he was warning Russia they better not start a competing currency to the dollar. And they said, no, we're not going to do that. But Trump was really worried about that. So that's kind of the backdrop to a lot of these tariffs that you've seen. And again, we saw these tariffs put on, I think it was April 2nd, Liberation Day, huge tariffs on all countries, and the stock market crashed. And everyone panicked. This is the end. We're all going to die. And there was some back and forth. But today, Trump said, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to put a pause on all the other tariffs except for China. China, we're going to even hit harder, and because they don't play fair. And the markets just loved it. I think it was the greatest increase in the market in history. It's up 9% or something. Bitcoin went up. So everyone's happy again, even though we still have tariffs in other countries, but it's like 10%, which is a little bit of interesting psychology. I was talking to Z-Man about that. Because if Trump just had done originally like, oh, we're just going to have 10% on everyone, but higher on China, the market would have crashed. But he does all this heavy stuff first. Then when he pulls it back, everyone's like, oh, you're great. This is wonderful. And the market goes up. It's a psychology. It's the psychology of the deal. Trump loves this sort of thing. And so people are really happy now. They would have been pissed about a 10% tariff and worried about China. But China is a problem, and for a couple of reasons. Anyone that's done business with China knows they're very unethical, the people in the government there. I'm sure there's some good people there, but they're corrupt, and they don't follow through. They steal, they cheat, and that's their culture, and you're not going to get around that. Even years ago, when I was in the business world, my boss talked to me about, because we're doing some business with China because they agreed to something. And he said, well, that's just a Chinese handshake. And I'm like, well, what's a Chinese handshake? He says it's a handshake that doesn't mean anything. Because in the West, traditionally, when men would shake hands, even before you wrote it down in the contract, that was your word and you had some honor. Whereas the Chinese, especially when it deals with us in the West, they don't have any ethical things that they have to honor their word at all. And it's a alien way of thinking. And a lot of US companies have been lured into China. Then they find out that China changes the agreement and they cheat and they do all this type of stuff because this is how they roll. This is how they roll. And so a lot of people that have done business with China have been very upset with it. But China now is, we basically have three superpowers in the world. The United States is number one. And then it's China. It's not really Russia. Russia's powerful, but China is more of a threat. And if we were have a war, I've talked to people that were in the military and officers. I said, who would United States rather fight, Russia or China? And they said, oh, well, Russia would be an easier fight than China. China would be tough. And that's the thing. China is very aggressive. Militarily, they're building up and they're pretty sophisticated now. And a lot of the manufacturing they've taken out of the United States, which puts the United States at a security risk. If we ever should be in a war with China, we no longer have manufacturing where we could build ammunition or computer chips. And this is a risk. And so part of the issue here that Trump's dealing with is how to deal with China. So all this tariff stuff, it was more of a smokescreen. He doesn't really care about tariffs on that island that's just penguins or some bizarre African country. No one gives a shit really about those people, but he cares about China. So it was a smokescreen to distract people and other countries. And then he just hit hard China and eased back on all the other countries. Because again, he's trying to play the China card. He's trying to get a lot of people in the world aligned against China because he sees China as our biggest threat. So this is what the tariffs are all about. And it's China's digging their heels in because they're hitting us with tariffs, and it's who's going to break first. There's a lot of people think we will because we have a press that hates Trump. And if it starts to become more expensive to buy Chinese shit at Walmart, the press is going to freak out. People are going to cry about inflation. They don't have to worry about that in China because the communist government runs everything and they just crack down on the press. But still in China, there's always a chance of revolution and people are okay if they're prosperous, but we're their biggest trading partner. And if they can't sell their stuff to America, a lot of their economic model could be smoke and mirrors, and it could really implode and cause a problem with China. So it's kind of a high stakes game of chicken. Who's going to blink first? Is it going to be the United States or China, or no one's going to blink? And in that case, who's going to feel the most pain? America, because we don't have the cheap Chinese goods, or China because they can't sell the goods and they have overproduction and they're going to have a huge financial mess in China. So it's an interesting time that how all of this seems to be, it's not about Canada, it's not about Mexico, it's not about the UK, it's about China. And even today, it's funny how history echoes. We're talking about the China card and how to play the China card and to manipulate people around that. It's pretty fascinating. Thank you guys. And again, be sure to subscribe to me. I have a show every day. Watch that. But also on every Wednesday, I do a show with Z-Man. A lot of fun. If you haven't checked it out, haven't seen it, it's up on YouTube. It's on Rumble. Check out our discussion. I get a lot of good feedback about our shows. We deep dive into a subject. And if you have an idea of a subject, just email me and we may take that up. We'd like to talk about various things. So thanks a lot. Talk to you guys later.